Okay, so guys, we're going to look at cardiorespiratory system this morning, and we're also going to look at it and its relation to exercise. So first of all, has everybody had the videos that I sent out yesterday? Have you had a chance to look at them? If you haven't, don't worry, because obviously you can watch them again later. But what I'm going through today is going to relate a lot to those videos.
Yeah.
I've had them. Good. Okay. So what we're going to look at with this session is we're going to recap the structure and function of the circulatory system. So difference, excuse me, between level 2 fitness instructing and level 3 personal training when it comes to the circulatory system. Little things that we're going to look at now, but when you recap over the level 2 content of cardiorespiratory system, there's not a massive difference, not a massive jump up to the level 3. Now, where it does jump up is when it's relating it to exercise and relating it to things like health benefits, weight loss, resistance. We're going to recap the structure and function of the circulatory system. We'll recap the structure and function of the respiratory system. And then we're going to look at those systems in relation to health benefits, weight loss, resistance training, and sports performance. So what I want you guys to think about now is kind of take your fitness instructor hat off and put on your personal trainer hat, because it's a lot different to being a personal trainer and a fitness instructor. So I want you guys thinking more about the personal trainer side of things now rather than the fitness instructor side. The fitness instructor side, it's all about really, really basic things, how to use pieces of equipment and how to perform exercises correctly. Because you've all passed your level 2, we assume that that is what you do on a day-to-day basis now. So we're going to take it a step higher and a step further. So when we look at cardiorespiratory system, it's now really being able to use it and adapt it to the different goals that your client is going to have. So the heart itself. So it's located in the chest, slightly to the left. It's to maintain circulation. It's made up of two halves. Two halves. The right side carries deoxygenated blood. The left side carries oxygenated blood. So pump includes circulation around the body, split into two halves. Two halves, the right side with deoxygenated blood and the left side with oxygenated blood. It's two upper collecting chambers called the atria, two lower pumping chambers called the ventricles. There are valves to ensure that the flow is one way. Coronary arteries supply heart muscle with oxygenated blood, and the sinoatrial node will ensure the sequence of contraction is maintained. Okay, can you just make sure that you're all on mute? There's a bit of background noise going on, so just check that you're on mute if that's okay, please. So the heart, just a recap on it. So it's a pump that maintains circulation, split into two halves. The right side carrying deoxygenated blood, the left side carrying oxygenated blood. Two upper collecting chambers called the atria, two lower pumping chambers called the ventricles. Valves ensure that the flow is one way. So valves between the atria and the ventricles are called the atrioventricular valves. Okay? On the left side of the heart, you've got the bicuspid mitral valve. On the right side of the heart, you've got the tricuspid valve. In the pulmonary artery, you've got the pulmonic valve, and in the aorta, you've got the aortic valve. So those are both called semilunar valves. So the semilunar valves will prevent backflow of blood into the ventricles. The atrioventricular valves will prevent backflow of blood from the ventricles back into the atria. Okay. Coronary will supply the heart muscle with oxygenated blood. So the heart is a muscle itself, so it needs its own blood supply. So coronary arteries will supply the heart muscle with oxygenated blood. Sinoatrial node, or the SA node as it's called, will ensure the sequence at its normal pace. Okay, so the SA node. This is the diagram of the heart itself. So this, if you know what we're looking at here is the flow of blood through the heart. So if we start on the right side of the heart, now the right side of the heart, as you look at it, will be the left. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava have oxygenated blood to the heart. Up with the oxygenated blood, the tricuspid valve will open, allowing blood to flow from the right atrium into the right ventricle. The right ventricle will then pump blood out through the pulmonary artery and through the semilunar valve, the pulmonic valve. So the pulmonic valve will open up, allow the right ventricle to pump deoxygenated blood out through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Within the lungs is where gaseous exchange takes place. We pick up oxygen, we get rid of carbon dioxide, then oxygenated blood is pumped back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. So the pulmonary veins will then supply that oxygenated blood. It'll fill up the left atrium. Bicuspid mitral valve will open up, allow blood to flow into the left ventricle. The left ventricle will then pump blood out through the aortic valve and out through the aorta to the heart, supplying the body and to arteries, then to arterioles, and then the systemic capillaries will allow gaseous exchange to take place within the lungs, within the muscles and systems of the body. Our waste product then is carbon dioxide, which is picked up into those capillaries, and then those capillaries will branch into venules, into veins, and then the inferior and superior vena cava will then refill the right atrium and start the process over again. Okay. So in that video that I've sent you out is basically what I've just said, but I draw the diagram and label it as well as we go along. My advice to you, if you are unsure about the flow of blood through the heart, is that diagram that I draw. If you draw it as well, so draw it along with me. So you draw it as I'm kind of doing it as well in the video. Then what I'd advise you to do is to try and draw it without looking at the video, without looking at any notes. See how much you know. Check it, see how well you've done, fill in any gaps that you may have or any corrections that you need to do, and then do it again. The more you do it, the more you draw it and label it and look at the flow of blood through, means that you're going to kind of gain that knowledge of the flow of blood. Is that okay? Any questions? That's just why the video is really important. So both of those videos look at the circulatory system and the flow of blood through the heart and around the body. Okay, coronary circulation then. The heart requires its own supply of oxygen and nutrients. Right and left coronary arteries stem directly from the aorta and supply the heart muscles with oxygen and nutrients through a series of capillary beds. Coronary veins will then take deoxygenated blood back to the vena cava. If blood flow is reduced, it will lead to heart disease. Okay, so the artery will stem from the aorta, supply the heart muscle itself through a series of capillary beds in the heart muscle. It will then take blood from the coronary vein back to the vena cava and back into the heart to start the process all over again. Now, coronary heart disease. So coronary heart disease is a buildup of plaque within the coronary arteries. So it's preventing blood supply and oxygen supply to the heart muscle itself. Atherosclerosis is the condition where plaque will build up within the artery walls. So this can happen in the coronary arteries, but it can also happen around the body, the arteries of the body. We can see on the left side, we've got a normal artery where blood flow is not restricted at all. Okay, so blood flow is normal, it's able to flow through quite freely. On the right-hand side, we see where the artery is narrowed by that plaque buildup. So atherosclerotic plaque, which is a plaque buildup within the artery walls, is reducing that blood flow. So because that blood flow is reduced, blood pressure will increase. So this is where high cholesterol will build up that plaque within the artery walls. So what happens in the coronary artery, that's coronary heart disease, etc. Simply understand that. Yes, in the chat box if you say if you think yes, or that type, or no, and I can obviously recap it. Right. So blood pressure. So because of a buildup of plaque within the artery walls, it can increase an individual's blood pressure. So blood pressure is the pressure within the arteries. It's produced by the contraction of the heart, measured by systolic pressure when the heart contracts, diastolic pressure when the heart relaxes. Regular exercise can lead to the reduction or normalizing of high blood pressure. So systolic pressure is the high number on the top. Diastolic pressure is the low number on the bottom when the heart relaxes. So our blood pressure guidelines can vary, but we go by the following table. So low blood pressure is classed as anything under 100 over 60. So can we see how that is? So the systolic over the diastolic. So anything under 100 over 60 is classed as low blood pressure. Optimal blood pressure, where we want to be, is 120 over 80. Normal blood pressure is about 130 over 85. On the high side of normal is anything between 130 and 139 over 85 to 89. Stage 1 hypertension. So hypertension is another name for high blood pressure. So hyper meaning high, and then obviously the tension on the artery walls. So stage 1 hypertension will be 140 to 159 over 90 to 99. Stage 2 hypertension, 160 to 179 over 100 to 109. And then stage 3 hypertension is anything above 180 over 110. Okay, so question for you. At which category should we as personal trainers and as fitness professionals refer somebody back to their GP if we feel that they're not able to exercise, they shouldn't exercise? At which category should we be referring them to their GP? Anybody? Go again. So instead of high normal, go to high. Okay, we can train them. Stage 1 hypertension is where we will be referring them back to their GP for some advice. So this is important that we need to be delicate about this, okay, with our clients. We need to think about when we do our blood pressure test. So what time of the day we do our blood pressure test, what our client has been doing up to their blood pressure test. So for example, if somebody's just run up the stairs to the gym and then we do a blood pressure reading with them, their blood pressure is going to be up, okay, higher than what their normal blood pressure would be. Oh, as soon as you tell somebody that they're going to have their blood pressure reading taken, the blood pressure can go up. Okay, they can get a little bit anxious about what the result might be. Okay, so we need to take these things into account. What we should obviously be doing as personal trainers is giving our client advance notice, so a couple of days beforehand, let them know we're going to be doing a blood pressure reading with them on the day that they come in, so they kind of prepare themselves for it, if you like. And think about what they've been doing up until, have they had a stressful day or not already before they do the blood pressure reading. So what we tend to do is when you take a blood pressure reading, is take 3 readings. Take the first reading. So the first reading might be, for example, 142 over 92, which puts them in that stage hypertension bracket. So straight away, it was kind of alarm bells a little bit. Stage hypertension, right? We're looking to refer them to the GP. However, give them a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Talk about everything other than pressure to try and relax them a little bit more, bring them down a little bit. Take another reading 2 minutes later, see what that comes up as, and then take a third reading another minute or two after that, and then take an average of those 3 readings, and that's the reading that we would go with, an average over 3 different readings. Okay, so it might drop back down into that high normal or even back into the normal category. However, if you've got somebody who is consistently in the stage 1 or the stage 2, we need to refer them to the doctor. Now, how you refer them to the doctor is important. Don't panic the client. Just say, we're getting some high readings on this. Just to your GP, ask them to do a blood pressure reading with you, and just get some advice from your doctor with regards to training and how much training you should or shouldn't be doing. Okay, so we don't want to panic the client about it, but we just want to say your blood pressure is reading a little bit high for us at the moment. Maybe we might do it in a couple of days' time to see if it's come down because you've maybe had a stressful day, but I'd prefer you to go to your GP and just. So if we've got a client at stage 3 hypertension, that client will not participate in any exercise at all. They will obviously be under GP guidance and probably on medication. If we've got somebody in the stage 3 category, as soon as they start to train, their blood pressure is going to go up even higher. So we think about during an exercise session, if we've got a client in the stage 1 bracket, and then when we train, it's going to pop up higher as we train them. But it's important that we exercise to bring that blood pressure down. But someone who's stage 3 will not be exercising at all. They will be under medical supervision until their blood pressure comes down through medication, and then into more of a stage 2, stage 1, where they will be probably under GP referral qualified instructor to bring that blood pressure back down again. Has anybody got any questions on any of that? Has anybody come across any clients or anybody who has been in the high blood pressure category? Okay, you're all very quiet today. Okay, so moving on from the heart, we look at the lungs. So the lungs located in the thorax, protected by the ribs. So as we can see in the diagram, air will pass in through the nose and the mouth, past the pharynx, past the larynx, down the trachea. Trachea branches into 2 bronchus. At the ends of the bronchus, you've got the bronchioles, and at the end of the bronchioles, you've got the alveoli where gaseous exchange takes place. You can also see the diaphragm just below the lungs, which is one of the respiratory muscles. So the air that we breathe, so the gases that come in, inhaled air, and gases that come out, exhaled air, and then the difference, the percentage difference in the amount that we retain and that we exhale. So nitrogen, the amount of nitrogen that we breathe in is 79% of the air that we breathe in is nitrogen. We obviously breathe out all of that 79% nitrogen, so there's no change in the amount that's retained. Of the air that we breathe in, 21% of it is oxygen, and the air that we breathe out, 17% of that is oxygen. So there's only a 4% decrease. So we only really retain 4% of oxygen that we breathe in. Carbon dioxide, when we inhale it, is less than 1%, but we breathe out 4% oxygen. So there's an increase of 4%. And then the trace gases in the air, minus 0.001%, and we obviously breathe out the same amount of trace gases. So when we look at oxygen and carbon dioxide, you may think that all of the air that we breathe out is carbon dioxide. Okay? However, only 4% of the air that we breathe out is carbon dioxide. We actually breathe out more oxygen than carbon dioxide. So we think about anybody who is first aid trained or CPR trained, those rescue breaths are really important because you are breathing in the air that you breathe into that casualty, 17% of it is oxygen. So those rescue breaths are really important, because a lot of people think that I'm just breathing carbon dioxide into this casualty, it's not going to do anything for them. So the air that you actually breathe in, 17% of it is oxygen. Okay. The respiratory muscles then. So the diaphragm sits below the lungs. It's a dome-shaped muscle. When it contracts, it flattens, increasing the thoracic cavity. So when we look at breathing, the lungs themselves are not muscles. They are just 2 air sacs within the thoracic cavity. So to pull air in, what we're looking to do is to increase the space within the thoracic cavity. As we can see in the diagram, the dome-shaped diaphragm, when it contracts, it will flatten. Okay, so it increases that space in the thoracic cavity. That space needs to be filled, so air is pulled in through the nose and the mouth to fill up the lungs to fill that space. We've also got external and internal intercostals. So the external intercostals will pull the ribs up and out, again, increasing that space in the thoracic cavity. That space needs to be filled, so air is pulled in to fill the lungs to fill that space. When we breathe out, the internal intercostals will pull the ribs down and inward. The diaphragm will relax and go back to its dome shape. So it decreases that space within the thoracic cavity, squashing the lungs and pushing the air out. Okay, this diagram may help with that. So for inhalation, we can see the diaphragm contracts and flattens. The red line is the diaphragm contracted, flattens. So the lung size will increase. Okay, so air is pulled in through the nose and mouth, down the trachea, and to fill up the lungs, to fill that space. When the diaphragm relaxes, we can see that the space now in the thoracic cavity is reduced, so it squashes the lungs and pushes air back out. So the lung size is decreased. So the lungs are not muscles. Does everybody understand that, or do you want me to recap it? Recap? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so just do a quick recap. So to breathe in, what happens is the diaphragm, which sits below the lungs, will contract and flatten. Okay, so when you contract it, it shortens and flattens. So all this space in the thoracic cavity now needs to be filled because we've created more space in there. So air is pulled in to fill up the lungs, to fill up that thoracic cavity space. Also, the external intercostals will lift the rib cage up and out, creating space. So you think about it, when you take a deep breath in, you think that you're actually pulling air in by, inflating your lungs. You're actually contracting your external intercostals by pulling the rib cage up and out, and you're contracting your diaphragm by flattening it. And that is what's pulling the air in. To breathe out, then, the diaphragm will relax, so it'll go back to its dome shape, reducing the space. The internal intercostals will pull the rib cage down and in, so reducing all that space, squashing the lungs and pushing air back out to the nose and mouth. Does that make sense? I think I've got a bit of video on this as well, so I'll send it out. Let me just make a note of that. Cool. Right. So gaseous exchange then is also known as diffusion. Okay, so if you see gaseous exchange or you see diffusion, it means the same thing. This is the exchange of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide within the lungs. This occurs within the capillaries that surround the alveoli in the lungs. So capillaries surround the alveoli. Because those capillaries are only one cell thick, they allow carbon dioxide and oxygen to switch places. This also happens within the systems and muscles of the body. So within the systems and muscles of the body, you've got the capillary beds within the muscles, for example, where oxygen is used to fuel the muscle. Carbon dioxide is your waste product, so they can swap over because those capillaries are one cell thick. Diffusion in the lungs is known as pulmonary diffusion. So if we think pulmonary is all about lungs, and then diffusion within the systems of the body is known as systemic diffusion. Okay. So guidelines for cardiorespiratory training. Cardiovascular fitness is also referred to as stamina, endurance, cardiorespiratory fitness, heart and lungs, or aerobic fitness. All these terms essentially refer to the ability to take in, transport, and utilize oxygen. VO2 max is the volume of oxygen that you can take in one breath. So the amount of oxygen you can fill the lungs with in one breath. So to improve our respiratory system, it's about being able to utilize more oxygen. So cardiovascular exercise can be defined as being rhythmic in nature, continuous, uses large muscle groups under low to moderate tension over an extended period of time, and frequently referred to as aerobic exercise. So aerobic meaning with oxygen. So our heart rate training zones, so this is all part of Principles of Exercise Level 2. So we can look at the 4 key aerobic heart rate training zones. So we've got our moderate aerobic zone where we're working our client at 50% of their maximum heart rate, so mainly for untrained sedentary individuals. If we want to work in a client's fat burning zone or the weight management zone, we work them at a moderate intensity, suitable for most individuals, where we're working between 60 and 70 of their maximum heart rate. The aerobic fitness zone At a vigorous intensity for improvements in cardiovascular fitness, we're looking between 70 and 80% of maximum heart rate. And then the peak aerobic performance zone, which is a challenge in intensity for very well-trained individuals, we're looking up at 80 to 90% of maximum heart rate. Does everybody know how to calculate 70%, for example, of maximum heart rate? What is maximum heart rate, first of all?
Is it 220 minus your age?
So that's your maximum heart rate, 220 minus your age. And then to work out, for example, aerobic fitness zone, you would take that maximum heart rate, times it by 70, and then the answer that you get divided by 100, then that's the heart rate that you're aiming for to get that individual to ensure that they are working their aerobic fitness zone. Now, the weight management zone. So there's a little bit of controversy over the weight management zone. This is a bit old school weight management zone where you keep somebody down at a lower intensity, at a moderate intensity to burn fat. Research has come out obviously in the past few years where we look at high intensity interval training, which is more effective for fat burning and for losing weight. But if we think about, if we've got a beginner client, we're not going to start putting them straight into high intensity interval training sessions. So we would keep them in that weight management zone, first of all, before then they've got built up a bit of a fitness level, they've built up technique, they've built up experience to be able to then push them into more high intensity interval training. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Okay. Exercise intensity and CV adaptations. So heart rate changes in response to exercise. Heart size, stroke volume, heart rate, oxygen uptake, and then VO2 max will all increase. When you exercise, all of these things will increase. Heart rate is a valid measure of both the exercise intensity, but also the cardiovascular performance progression. Okay? So when we train a client, we can use their heart rate to look at what intensity they're working at. But also we can look at their heart rate over a period of time and see if they are progressing, if they are improving their fitness level. So for example, we'll take their heart rate, let me go back, sorry. We do an exercise where we've got a client on a rowing machine. They're rowing at 30 strokes per minute for 10 minutes, okay? So that's what they've got to keep to. During that session, we will take their heart rate. Okay, so we'll take it at various intervals and we'll work out an average heart rate by the end of the session. What we'll then do is we'll train that client for 6 to 8 weeks, for example, and then we'll bring them back and do the exact same session that we did. So 10 minutes rowing at 30 strokes per minute, and we'll take their heart rates again. What we should see is that heart rate is less than 6-8 weeks ago, because we've got cardiovascular performance progression, where the heart doesn't have to work as hard as it did 6 to 8 weeks ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So if you've got a client who's wanting to improve their fitness level, this is a good test to do. So you get them on a piece of equipment, or it's easier to do it on a piece of equipment rather than being outside, because you need to take heart rates as you go through it. So if they've got a heart rate monitor, a lot of equipment now will have heart rate up on the screen, so it's easier for you to track it rather than having to stop them, take a heart rate, etc., etc. So if we've got a heart rate monitor on them, we can keep track of their heart rate through the session. Then in 6 to 8 weeks, you do the exact same session, exact same intensity, exact same time, and we should see a considerable reduction in their heart rate in that session. And that is an indicator that they are getting fitter. Okay. So heart rate is affected by a number of factors, things like medication, pregnancy, etc. So we need to be aware of these. There are effective alternative methods of measuring intensity. So we've got the RPE scale, we've got the talk test, and we've got observation that we can use to monitor intensity throughout a session. So the RPE scale, so the RPE scale kind of works in line with heart rate training zones as well. So the RPE scale, as you all know, is the rate of perceived exertion, 1 to 10 on the scale as to how the client feels during the session. So what we've got here is percentages of maximum heart rate. where we can see our client improves overall health and health recovery anywhere above 50%. Basic endurance and fat burn, 60 to 70%, improving aerobic fitness, 70 to 80%, increasing maximum performance capacity at 80 to 90%, and then developing maximum performance and speed at 90 to 100% of maximum heart rate. So if we've got a weight loss client, the types of training that we can look to do with a weight loss client are long, slow duration training, interval training, and fartlek training. To monitor their intensity, we can use heart rate training zones and rate of perceived exertion. So for heart rate training zone, we're looking 50 to 70% of maximum heart rate. And if we're looking at rate of perceived exertion, we're looking between 5 and 8. Okay, so when you're working with a client who wants to lose weight, these are the types of intensities that we need to be working at with them. Okay, we can do long, slow duration training, interval training, and fartlek training. Now, long, slow duration, interval, and fartlek training, I'm going to send you a link today to some videos that I've done which explains long, slow duration training, interval, and fartlek training. What we normally do in the gym environment and when we are there is we will do these in the gym, okay, when you do come on the course. But because obviously we're not able to do that at the moment, I've done some videos which I'm going to send you a link for. You will all have the same login details for that, and I'll detail what you need to do on the email that I sent out. Okay, so if we're doing interval training, for example, with a weight loss client, we would maybe do 1 minute at level 5 on the RPE scale, 1 minute, push them up to level 7 on the RPE scale, bring them back down to 5, bring them up to 7, back to 5, minute on, minute off, something like that. If we're doing long, slow duration training, we would maybe build them up to a level 7 on the RPE scale, maintain them at level 7 for 10 to 15 minutes, and then bring them back down to level 5 by the end. Okay, fartlek training, we would change those intensities all the way through, but keeping them within that 5 and 8 on the RPE scale on that zone. Everybody understand that?
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're utilizing the aerobic energy system to burn excess fat. So the main fuel for aerobic energy system is carbohydrates and fats. While cardio does burn calories and helps aid in weight loss, combining it with at least 2 to 3 days a week of resistance training workouts can increase the rate at which you lose weight or lose fat. Okay, so yes, aerobic training will reduce body fat percentage, but what we need to try to do is to combine it with at least 2 to 3 days a week of resistance training, and we will see our results quicker. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so to touch on high intensity interval training then. HIIT training has shown greater results for reduced body fat compared to steady state training due to, during the intervals, the muscles burn a significant amount of their sugar stores, which triggers a reaction causing them to rapidly refuel by sucking glucose from elsewhere in the body. This process requires insulin, and over time the body responds by becoming more sensitive to small amounts of insulin. If insulin levels are high, the body is unable to burn fat as efficiently. So by making the body more sensitive to smaller amounts of insulin, you are able to re-engage the fat-burning machinery. Okay, so that's a brief explanation as to how high-intensity interval training works. So it's all about using the sugars quickly, and then once you've used those sugars, it means we're then going to start to pull sugar from our fat stores. Okay, so insulin, so the lower amount of insulin that we can utilize means that we're going to then tap into those fat stores and burn fat more efficiently. Intense exercise depletes the oxygen available to the muscles, forcing them to burn fat for energy instead. The body burns calories for hours after the workout ends in order to make up for the resulting oxygen debt. So after the session, for a number of hours after the session, because we have got reduced oxygen within the body, we're still able to burn fat after completing the session. But to do that, it means we need to work at a higher intensity than that weight management zone. Any questions on that, guys?
No.
Okay, is everybody else okay? Because I seem to be only getting 1 or 2 people answering, or can you even hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Cool. Good. Okay. Muscular strength and endurance client. So muscular strength or hypertrophy client. So if we want to build strength with a client, or we want to work hypertrophy training with a client. So remember, this is all connected to cardiovascular training now. This afternoon, when we look at musculoskeletal system, we'll kind of do this again, but we look at muscles. So this is going to look at heart and lungs. So a hypertrophy client and a strength client. So an increase in muscle size and strength will place greater demands on the systems of the body to fuel those muscles with energy and oxygen. So because you've got bigger muscles and stronger muscles, we need to get more fuel to them. To get more fuel to them, obviously the circulatory system does that. So the heart and lungs therefore need to be able to cope with extra demands, and this is why it is so important to include cardiovascular training with a strength or hypertrophy program. During exercise, your muscles have to work harder, which increases their demand for oxygen. This is why your breathing and heart rate increase. To help pull more oxygen into your bloodstream, as you exercise, the oxygen that reaches your muscles never leaves, but rather converts the available glucose into ATP. So the more oxygen that you bring into the muscles, you can then convert it into ATP, your energy currency. So again, we can use long, slow duration training, interval training, and fartlek for a muscular strength and hypertrophy client. So the intensity that we're going to work at is similar to that of our weight loss client. So between 50 and 70% of maximum heart rate. Probably more on the 70, 80% side, so up towards the vigorous activity, because we want to place more demands on the heart and lungs themselves. But again, doing different types of training, long slow duration, interval training, and fartlek training, it's all about building that heart muscle size up. So if you're building skeletal muscle up, we need to build that cardiac muscle up as well as the lung capacity and diaphragm and intercostal muscles to be able to pull in more oxygen. If you've got bigger muscles, we need to be able to supply those bigger muscles with the energy and oxygen that they require. Any questions on muscular strength or hypertrophy training? Do you know of anybody, or do you yourself, anybody who does strength training or hypertrophy training who do not do cardiovascular training?
Yeah, quite often you can see it in the gym.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you do see it everywhere. So we as personal trainers now, it is our duty basically to encourage those types of clients to do cardiovascular training, but tell them why. So if they're building muscle, but they're not building their heart, that is the potential, and obviously we don't want to scare people, but that is the potential for a heart attack later down the line, because their heart and lungs cannot cope with the amount of extra muscle that's within the body. Okay, so this is why we hear about a lot of strong men, etc., having heart attacks. Bodybuilders having heart attacks and heart failure. It's because they've got that amount of muscle in their body. They haven't done enough cardiovascular training, or their heart is not able to cope with the amount of muscle that's in the body. Okay, sports performance then. So aerobic training, also called cardio, improves an athlete's ability to use oxygen to sustain activity for periods of time. Examples of sports that demand long-term supplies of oxygen include marathon runners and distance swimmers. Success in many sports requires a repeated burst of high-intensity activity that draw on quick energy sources, but require increasing levels of aerobic fitness as the duration of the activity increases. Since you get better at whatever you train for, matching the energy patterns, so how intense it is, how often it is, how much recovery time is needed, so matching the energy patterns of a sport with your training program is key to success in competition. So matching sport demands with workout regimes is called sport-specific training. So we think about the sport that the client is doing. If we can replicate that sport within their training, it's obviously called sport-specific training. We're training specifically for that sport. So athletes' bodies adapt very specifically to low to moderate intensity activities that last for more than just a few minutes. Sustained workouts improve your body's ability to breathe in and use oxygen. Here are the types of adjustments our bodies make internally to make these improvements. So, effects of aerobic training on the muscles. So mainly slow twitch muscle fibers and the different support systems of the body. So things like respiratory system, endocrine system. That increase cardio fitness and muscular endurance include. So increases in the number of mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the small structures known as the powerhouses. So these mitochondria inside the muscle cells that produce energy from oxygen. Increases in the muscle's ability to use fat as fuel. You get greater lung capacity, so you're able to pull in more oxygen each breath. Improved heart stroke volume, the amount of blood pumped with each beat. Changes in hormones, so epinephrine, for example, that break down and move fat through the body to use as fuel. So what we're talking about here is that becomes more efficient. And an increase in lean body mass. So more muscle mass, reduced body fat percentage. Okay. So by training aerobic fitness, by training cardiovascularly, you will get all of these benefits to benefit the sport that you're doing. So the intensity, how hard, the duration, how long, and the frequency, how often, are key ways to improve your ability to maintain cardio activity. Fitness improves when intensity is between 70 to 80% of maximum heart rate, but this may not be adequate for endurance athletes in some sports and events. Elite endurance athletes often utilize high-intensity interval exercise in their training regimes. Recent studies indicate that HIIT is a time-efficient strategy to stimulate a number of muscle adaptations that are comparable to traditional endurance training. Athletes may include other sport-specific activities in interval training workouts. So what they're doing is they're mixing their training. So if we've got a long-distance runner, for example, they will do a certain amount of HIIT training within their program. So we think, why are they doing high-intensity work when their sport is low intensity? But what we're doing is we see that the benefits to the cardiorespiratory system, we can benefit the cardiorespiratory system in a lower amount of time. So rather than going out and running at a slower intensity, we can split up their sessions. So maybe 2 sessions a week of HIIT training will take the time down. Rather than going out and running for 2 hours, they could do a half-hour, 40-minute HIIT session and get the same, if not more, benefit from it. So cardiorespiratory system and special populations. So now we're coming back to our general public and people who use our facilities. So children have a lower blood volume. They have less efficient temperature regulation, and heart chambers are smaller, so heart rate is higher and stroke volume is lower. And they are also less efficient in processing oxygen. So if you're working with children, we need to think about all of these things when we work. So the type of training that would probably suit them better is interval training. Now, we don't mean working really hard, rest, work really hard, rest. We look at a moderate intensity for that on phase. So we'd maybe push them up to maybe a level 7 on the RPE scale, bring them back down to a level 5. So a minute at level 7, minute at level 5, minute at level 7, minute at level 5. Or, depending on their experience, 2 minutes at level 7, 1 minute at level 5, 2 at 7, 1 at 5. So we're going to give them a bout of exercise with some recovery, bout of exercise with some recovery, rather than keeping them at level 7 for 10 to 15 minutes. This allows all of these things to take place. So children, so what we're talking about here is like the 14 to 16 age range with this. Anything lower than that, obviously this is going to be more, it's going to affect younger children even more. So when we talk about children, we're basically talking anything under the age of 16. But within the gyms that we work in, well, any gym that I used to work in, we didn't allow under 16s unless it was a specific teen fit session, as we called it, and that was for 14 to 16-year-olds. Okay. So pregnancy. In pregnancy, the cardiovascular system is enhanced. Blood volume increases. Stroke volume and cardiac output both increase. Resting heart rate also increases, and venous return decreases. So again, in pregnancy, we need to think about these things. So the cardiovascular system is obviously enhanced because it is now working for 2. Blood volume increases, so we need more blood in the body because it's got to supply to. Stroke volume, the amount of blood pumped per beat. Cardiac output, the amount of blood pumped per minute, both increase. Heart rate will also increase because it has to work harder. And venous return, so blood coming back up to the heart, will decrease. So blood pooling can occur. So this is why it's really important that you do a good cool down with somebody who's pregnant. And also to benefit that venous return, to increase venous return, ask them to lie down with the feet up. So we do a full cool down with them at the end of the session. A little bit of stretching, maintenance stretching, no developmental stretching, no ballistic stretching, no PNF stretching. Just a little bit of maintenance stretching. And when they go home, ask them to make sure their feet are higher than their hips to help with that venous return. So we hear about in pregnancy swollen ankles, and that's all about blood pooling. So help that venous return. Obviously, remember with pregnancy, with working with children, with working with older adults, which we're going to look at in a second, with working with disabilities, you may need extra qualifications to work with these people. Okay, so my advice would be, if you are in doubt with working with any of these populations, is refer them to somebody who is more qualified. Okay. Aging population then. So some of the age-related changes can be as follows. Cardiac output decrease, VO2 max decrease, maximum heart rate will decrease, blood pressure can increase, and there's basically a general reduction in the efficiency of the cardiorespiratory system. Now, we don't tar everybody with the same brush because people are becoming more and more active. So people of a certain age, we don't just say, oh, because you're this age, all of this stuff has happened to you. But it could happen. So we need to be aware of it. Okay, so it's important that in that initial client interview, that first session that you do, we don't just make a judgment call. We'll maybe do a session with them, which is what you should do. Do the client interview, just give them a little taster session, try them out on a few different pieces of equipment, and then take some notes on what they can and can't do. Okay. And then with disabilities, so there are a range of medical conditions and disabilities which can have an impact on the function of the cardiorespiratory system. This will be specific to each individual. So rather than me going through loads and loads of different disabilities here, my advice is that you look at the disability in particular, get as much information as you can on that disability and how the cardiorespiratory system is affected by it, and get extra advice, refer them or get information from their medical professionals involved as to what they can and cannot do within a cardiorespiratory exercise program. Okay, so has anybody got any questions on the special populations I've just looked at?
That's fine.
Cool. Okay, so long-term benefits of cardiovascular training. Increased stroke volume, decrease in resting heart rate, decrease in resting blood pressure, increase in capillarization, increase in the size and number of mitochondria, decrease in number of red blood cells, increase in aerobic enzyme activity, a decrease in the incidence of disease, which can include mortality from all causes, decrease in coronary heart disease, cancer, hypertension, non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, type 2, osteoporosis, and depression. You get improved ability to recover during and after training, a decrease in percentage body fat, increased burning of fat at higher exercise intensities, the ability to work aerobically at higher exercise intensities, and an enhanced sense of well-being. So these are all the benefits of cardiovascular training. So when you work with your clients doing cardiovascular training, these are the types of things that we need to bang into them. Tell them this is why we're doing it. This is what it is going to do for you. Think about their specific goals. So if we've got somebody who is looking to lose weight, then obviously doing this cardiovascular work, we're going to help to decrease their body fat. We're increasing the burning of fat at higher exercise intensities. We're decreasing the risk of coronary heart disease, cancer, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, depression, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so we need to make sure we are telling our clients why we are doing this exercise. There's nothing worse than watching a personal trainer put a client through a really, really hard CV session The client is crawling out the door wondering what the hell just happened and why the hell did I have to do that. So as long as you make sure your clients are clear as to why you're doing this type of exercise and what it is doing for them, as they walk out the door, they will know that that was a really good session and I know that it has benefited me. Okay. So that's cardiorespiratory system. Any questions? Nope. Okay. There's no questions then, guys.
Could I ask a few questions at the end about the case study, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank
Bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, just going to jump back to the main page. Oops. Okay, I'm just stopping.